it actually gets onto live Facebook. So we'll just wait a few seconds. And we're also recording this, and we can share that afterwards if you want to use it for anything afterwards. Just see how many. Well, I think people are trickling in. What we could do is we can go ahead and get started since I have a little bit of intro to work with, and then just so we could get everybody, respect their time and your time. We are going to go ahead and start with this program. So first of all, I just want to say good evening and welcome to everyone who's joining us right now. We are very excited to have our February speaker program on the topic of digital rights and privacy in an age of disinformation. My name is Xiaoyan Zhao. I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of Kentucky and Southern Indiana. We are a hub for international exchange, dialogue, and learning located in Louisville, Kentucky. The World Affairs Council facilitates a variety of international professional and youth exchanges, speaker programs, and educational opportunities for the Kentuckiana region year-round. We are also nationally affiliated with the Global Ties US, the World Affairs Councils of America, and Sister Cities International. The World Affairs Council is a member-supported organization, but we are not member-exclusive in our programs, which are all open to the public. Our goal is always to ensure access to expert analysis and quality discussions on topics that really impact all of us locally, nationally, and globally. So today we are tackling a very pervasive but tricky issue of digital privacy, rights, and information, particularly around social media and internet use. One of the most pressing and challenging issues we face right now is how to get the most out of our digital world without the technologies getting the most out of us and taking advantage of our emotions, biases, and habits. For better or for worse, across all sectors of our modern society, the internet has proved to be an accelerator for the spread of information and connections. While we have all experienced its benefits, we have also seen how the internet has magnified and snowballed the darker fringes of society as a platform for misinformation and conspiracies. So to help us better understand this digital conundrum of sorts, we are joined today by Rebecca MacKinnon, who's the founding director of the Ranking Digital Rights Project at New America. Rebecca's going to provide us with a breakdown of the newly released RDR Corporate Accountability Index, which evaluates 26 of the world's most powerful internet, mobile, and telecommunications companies on their disclosed policies and practices. After her presentation, she will be joined by Alicia McLean, Director of Community and Education Initiatives at Microsoft Future of Work Initiative, and they will have a moderated conversation at that point. Alicia's work involves assisting the Louisville workforce to prepare for artificial intelligence and automation and infusing AI curriculum and experiences into both traditional and traditional education. So first of all, welcome to you both. And before I turn it over to Rebecca, I just want to do a quick reminder for everyone. We will be recording this webinar as well as live streaming it on Facebook. We will have about 30 minutes of moderated conversation and then some Q&A from all of you. You can submit your questions and comments at any time during this conversation in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and they will be answered as time allows. And with that, I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Rebecca to start us off. Rebecca?
Well, thank you so much, Xiaoyan, and to the World Affairs Council. I'm especially thrilled for two reasons to be doing this event today. One is that I gave a talk to your organization back in 2012 when my book came out So it's really thrilling to be reinvited. And also, I do have a family connection to Louisville. My late grandfather, Cyrus MacKinnon, ran the business side of the Courier Journal back before it was sold to Gannett. So I don't have any family there anymore, but I always feel very fondly about Louisville and my time spent there as a child, visiting my grandparents, and a few visits more recently. So I really appreciate being invited today. And with that, I'm going to try and share my screen, and I think it's working. So hopefully everyone can see that. Um, so we're talking about digital rights and privacy. And I think one thing to think about, these are topics that are very much in the news. I think everybody's quite freaked out about the power that technology has over our lives. And it is about power. It's increasingly, who controls what you can know, what you can learn about, as you're accessing information, as you're sharing information, what you can say online, who lets you speak online. There's a lot of talk about deplatforming recently. And also, who knows what about you, where you are, what you're doing, who you love, what you believe. Um, we're going through tremendous, rapid changes that are affecting our society in both good and bad ways. And Alicia is doing a lot of great work on the positive side, and using technology to advance education, learning, to help people really take advantage of technology for their work. And that's really important too. But one thing, there are many things that have kind of changed our world and our relationship to the world because of technology. And one has to do with the fact that it used to be, for a very long time, since industrial society started, people's labor was a commodity, right? And because of that, we had to develop a whole system of human rights and so on to prevent abuse of that. And it didn't happen overnight, and it was hard fought, and continues to be hard fought in many ways to get fair compensation for labor, how we organize our society in a way that we're able to work in a way that is really positive for everyone, not just the heads of companies, right? And so now we've got this transformation again, where it's not just our labor that is commodity, it's everything about us, right? It's where we go, what we post online, sort of our very essence of who we are is for sale through digital platforms, particularly through the business model. And we haven't yet developed both the laws and the governance and the accountability mechanisms to make sure that's not abused, and to enable people again to use their power over their own data and their own selves positively. So that's one of the things I'm going to talk about. And if I can advance my slides here we go. I want to share one story that was in my book that I may have shared back in my book talk back in the day, last time I visited you all, which is borrowed from a journalism professor at the University of Austin, Texas, where he talks about, he has a great analogy for kind of another way in which things have changed in our society. And this is a picture of a desert. Before the internet, we lived in a society of information scarcity. And so whether it was our media, whether it was the way business organized information, information about, whatever it was, jobs, education, and so on, it's all about helping people actually obtain information because information was scarce, right? But then, of course, the internet came and the rain came, and now we're in a rainforest. And when you organize a society in a desert, the threats that people face, the social conflicts that people face, the way in which you govern that society is very different than the way you're going to govern a society and address threats in a rainforest where animals and fungus and just everything is so abundant. And so you have to change many things about the way you live very fundamentally in order to survive. And of course, we don't want to be living in a state of nature where life is nasty, Brutus, and short, and whoever's richest and biggest and in the majority wins, right? That's not a good society for anybody. So we're I think pretty early on in the process of rethinking how we govern our society for this time of information overload. And that brings me to kind of where one of the debates that we've been having in our society today, fast forward to the issue of deplatforming. And I have one screenshot here that shows the message that a Twitter user got when his tweet was taken down by Twitter because he violated the rules. And another screenshot is what shows up when somebody's video on YouTube was taken down. And what this represents, and of course, this is something that we've all been talking quite a lot with the former president having been deplatformed, is the tremendous power of private companies. And huge amount of debate. I think there was even a hearing in Congress today about whether it's appropriate that we allow companies to have this much power, and what do we do about it, and what do we do about it in a way that doesn't end up violating other rights, for example, free speech, but also other rights around civil liberties, and so on. And how do we deal with hate speech that creates tremendous harm for many communities? How do we ensure that platforms are not being weaponized against vulnerable groups? These are all super hard questions. And so, a lot of the debates going on today are, what do we do about all this content online? And the problem is that there isn't actually a lot of consensus in America today, or really, as far as I've seen, in many countries where there's sufficient free speech to have a free debate about whether platforms are censoring too much, or whether they're taking down too little content or too much content, or where do you draw the line in terms of what is good content, what is bad content. We don't have a lot of consensus in this country. There's debate whether we should hold companies liable for their users' content, but there's disagreement between left and right about whether you hold them liable for not taking down more content, or hold them liable for taking down too much content. And depending on which side of the aisle you're on, you might have different views on that. And so one thing that my colleagues and I have been doing is looking at, okay, what are the root issues here, beyond the issue of there is speech that can cause harm, and obviously we need to address that in a number of ways, but at what level, and how do we unpack that? And we did quite a bit of research, and we produced a report last year that I'm going to talk about first before I talk about our report this year. And that report's called "It's Not the Content, It's the Business Model: Democracy's Online Speech Challenge." And we try and get to what is the root cause that drives disinformation, that drives the targeting of inflammatory speech or extremist speech to certain people. And what the research has been showing, and there's quite a lot of organizations and scholars who've been researching this. I'm not in any way saying that we are the only ones who've reached this conclusion. But in our report, we point out that reliance on revenue from targeted advertising incentivizes companies, and we're talking about the social media companies primarily, to design platforms that are addictive, manufacture virality, and can maximize information that they can collect about users. And the point here is that we have a business model. So say with Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, they all operate a little bit differently, but there's kind of a similar type of business model where you want to maximize engagement on the platform. You want to keep people on the platform as long as possible. And you offer advertisers detailed information about users, some of which has been collected directly, some of which is inferred about what their likes are. And then advertisers and paying customers, so somebody who pays to boost a post can also be considered an advertiser on many of these platforms. They're able to target people with very specific messages. And that's one of the ways in which both disinformation or extremist content can become weaponized. And so the other issue that we're seeing is that when you go onto a social media platform, content is being recommended to you, and it's not just whatever the latest content was that was shared by your average friend. It comes up first. That content is prioritized to you based on what the company's algorithms and the data that's been collected on you, what that company's computer programs think is going to keep you on the platform and keep you clicking and keep you reacting, because that helps to generate the greatest revenue for advertisers. And the problem with all of this is that how the algorithms work, how people are being targeted is very opaque. Companies are not sharing much information with the public about how any of this works, and they're not giving us much choice or ability to control how it works. And so one of the things that we argue, this is a picture of, if you think about upstream and downstream and factories and polluting the water, you're not going to deal with the pollution problem just by cleaning up the water. You actually have to get to the source of what's causing the pollution and what's causing it to go into the river, what's causing it to go where, what's causing it to spread. So that's what we focus on. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ranking Digital Rights Corporate Accountability Index that my colleagues just published. Was it yesterday? Wow, it feels like longer already. We put out this ranking of the world's most powerful internet, mobile, and telecommunications companies, and we evaluate them on basically how transparent and accountable they're being with their users about their policies and practices that are affecting users' rights. So that includes both their information rights, right to freedom of expression, right to information, as well as the right to privacy. Let me just see, my mouse is not working. There we go. And you can go on the website and explore all the data. I don't want to give a 3-hour lecture on all the findings. I just want to point to a few things. One is that Twitter in the digital platform category came in first this year, primarily because they were more transparent in general than other platforms about how their algorithms work, how content is taken down, how content is moderated and policed. But they're only getting, they're still getting a failing grade, and everybody else is getting more than a failing grade. So there's a lot to do. And I'd also point out, since there's a lot of talk about Amazon's power, Amazon is the least transparent of all companies, all digital platforms in the index, and even less transparent about its policies than Chinese and Russian companies. So that's food for thought there. Now, our ranking is based on global universal human rights standards. So as you know, the First Amendment doesn't apply to platforms. The First Amendment says government shall pass no law limiting people's free expression. It doesn't, but the Constitution and U.S. law give U.S. Internet platforms the right to moderate content, to set the rules, and there's another law called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act that uh, enables them not to be sued for that content moderation function. Um, and but if you apply human rights principles to the platforms, and many of these companies, all of the US, most of the US platforms have actually made commitments to respect the universally recognized human rights of their users. Companies do have a responsibility to respect human rights, and we can hold them to that, and we can use international human rights standards to do that. And that is one of the things that we are doing with the index. And so basically, the UN guiding principles state that while governments have the primary, I'm sorry, my slides keep flipping back and forth. Governments have the primary duty to protect human rights. Companies have a responsibility to respect human rights, and both companies and governments must provide remedy to those whose rights have been violated. So there should be both private as well as legal remedy. Now let's see if I can get my slides to work. There we go. And so we look at companies' obligation to respect users' freedom of expression, not in the context of the First Amendment, because the First Amendment doesn't actually apply to companies, but based on international human rights law. And so long and the short of it is, international human rights law considers freedom of expression in the context of other rights. So people's right to life, people's right to privacy, right to free and fair elections, et cetera. And also the right to form opinions without interference is actually part of freedom of expression and information rights. So what we're looking for is, we expect that companies will have rules, but we expect that those rules will be formulated in accordance with human rights principles, that those rules will be clearly explained to users, that there will be transparency about how they're enforced, there'll be transparency about how the companies respond to government demands, and that policies and practices for setting and enforcing the rules are going to be put in place in consultation with affected communities, and particularly considering the impact on the most vulnerable users. So some of you may know that Facebook was actually asked to conduct a civil rights audit because civil rights groups around the country were concerned that the way Facebook had set up its content moderation was actually favoring people with power and money and resulting in discrimination against the most vulnerable users, and also enabling people with power and money to basically target vulnerable users in a number of exploitative ways. That civil rights audit was pretty damning, and made a number of recommendations about how the company needed to consider civil rights in how it handles speech on the platform. And that is all consistent with international human rights standards for freedom of expression. And we also look at privacy. And so we're looking both at, is the company being clear with users about what's being collected about them, what the company's doing with that information, who it's sharing that information with, are users given sufficient control over how their information is used? Is there sufficient transparency about how governments are asking for information? So if I'm using your platform, under what circumstances might law enforcement or national security bodies ask for my data? And what recourse might I have? How much transparency does the company actually tell me what its policies are for dealing with government demands, how they review them, that they have a human rights review process involved. And also we want to see that companies are providing evidence that they have strong security policies and practices, that they're doing security audits, that they're going to inform users when they have data breaches, all that kind of thing. So we want to see strong policies. And we also look at what's known as governance. So we want to see that companies are making commitments to respect and protect users' rights, but we also want to see evidence that companies are actually implementing those commitments. And one of the things we found is that while 60% of the companies we evaluated have made commitments of some kind, only a much smaller percentage are actually implementing remedy processes of actually addressing users' complaints about their rights being violated. And even fewer are doing what's known as due diligence. So that is, if you're going to protect your users' rights, you have to know the ways in which your business might potentially impact users, both positively and negatively. And if you identify ways that you might have a negative impact on users and their communities, you have to take action to mitigate that harm. And so the first step in that is what's known as due diligence or impact assessment. And I want to show just a couple things here, and then I'll wrap up. When it comes to impact assessment with major US platforms, and you'll see the digital platforms on the left hand of the slide, and Alicia is from Microsoft, and you'll see that that Microsoft does human rights impact assessments. It gets a full points on its human rights impact assessments related to government demands. And that's something that Microsoft has really been a leader on in terms of when it's receiving government surveillance demands, or also demands to remove content in other countries where they don't have the First Amendment. Microsoft is doing robust due diligence around that. Facebook and Google, they do some, but less so. Apple, a lot less due diligence about government demands, particularly when it comes to removing content from their app store around the world. Not much evidence of due diligence by Twitter, and no evidence by Amazon. Given, again, Amazon's power, that's troubling. We also look for due diligence around how they moderate their rules. So with all these terms of service and deplatforming and so on, whether or not Amazon was right and Apple were right to deplatform Parler, whether or not Twitter made the right decision, do they have a due diligence process involved to understand the impact of their policies and make sure that they're enforcing their policies in a way that are not resulting in rights violations? There's not that. A lot of companies are not showing any evidence that they're doing due diligence and that they aren't just enacting kind of random processes. So that's a concern. We also look for due diligence around how companies use algorithms. We're seeing even less due diligence there. And when it comes to targeted advertising, even less due diligence still. And given what I was talking about earlier about the way in which targeted advertising and algorithms affect the spread of content that people are concerned about, that in itself is a concern. I also want to point to a couple other things. This is one of our privacy indicators. It's how much control are the companies giving users about how their data is collected and retained. Amazon and Facebook are coming in last on that question, behind the Chinese and Russian companies. This is an issue here. One would argue that privacy law might help us in that area. When it comes to processes around securing user data, Apple and a Korean company, Kakao, actually come in first. when it comes to security processes, Amazon is disclosing nothing, no evidence of what its security processes are, and there's actually been some reporting on that in the media recently, with some whistleblowers being fired because of their concerns about data security at Amazon. So this again is another flag about company power. And so I'm going to wrap up so that Alicia and I can have a conversation. But on our website, we talk about our recommendations for what companies need to be doing. And this also ties into what types of regulation we might need. And we actually do not favor regulation that focuses on what you have to take down and what you can't take down, or actually holding companies, increasing company liability for content on the platform. And rather, we think that it's important first to require that companies conduct due diligence, to require that they be a lot more transparent about how their systems work, so that people can make decisions about what platforms they're using and why and how, and give people a lot more control. I would also say that we don't get into antitrust, but certainly if people would have more choice, a variety of platforms, I think we'd see more innovation around and competition around the protection of users' rights. And the final point, for those of you who have 401ks or invest in the stock market, you know that your portfolio has been doing quite well, and a big reason is that the big tech platforms have done very well during the pandemic, um, uh, because we've all been so dependent on them. And so there, we need to think about how can we use our leverage as investors, as consumers, and as citizens to try and get these companies to innovate and to be more accountable towards respecting our rights. And this is hard. This is a hard problem. It's like, how you get the big oil companies that used to make up all of our stock market portfolios to innovate in a more environmentally sustainable direction. It requires all of society to push, and it requires corporate leadership, and innovation. But it would also be helpful if the SEC could require companies to report more information about their due diligence and about their material risks, not just related to their financial returns, but related to what's known as environmental, social, and governance data. So are they addressing not only environmental risks, but risks to society that their business may pose, and that companies should be expected to be reporting on those, so that we can ensure that we're actually supporting companies that are going to contribute to the kind of society we want our children and grandchildren to be living in. And finally, and Alicia can ask me a bit more about this, but since this is the World Affairs Council, I do want to say that, I've been talking about US companies primarily, and there's of course been a lot of debate about whether we should be blocking Chinese platforms when the Chinese government has access to potentially to user data, might be able to manipulate things in other ways. And there's been some interesting arguments going back and forth about what the Biden administration should do. I myself tend to agree with the authors of this foreign affairs article, that an approach should be, well, first of all, we need privacy law that would make it a lot harder for companies to collect the kind of data that can then be used against us in ways that not only might hurt people personally, but might harm our national security. But we should require companies be much more transparent about how under what circumstances governments, whether it's our own government or whether it's the Chinese government or any other government, is able to access data or demand any other changes. And if companies cannot be more transparent, there should be consequences. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I apologize for having gone a little longer than I probably should have, but a lot to cover. And Alicia, take it away.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the presentation you just gave. It is a fascinating topic, obviously, and it's a lot, and it's got a lot of layers, and it's a lot of nuance to it, and a lot of factors to consider, for sure. I just want to start, and I've got a few questions coming in the chat and in the Q&A. I just want to start by asking how you got into this field, or how you became interested in this topic.
That's a great question, and it, it's like, how far back do we go? But I've had a few different careers, and I started out my adult life as a journalist, and I was actually in China when the internet showed up there, and then I was in Japan, reporting from Japan, where in the early thousands, when actually the first president to be elected thanks to internet organizing was in South Korea. A lot of people forget that or never knew it. And so I became interested very early in kind of both how the internet was transforming journalism and politics, but also the role that private companies were playing. And long story short, I ended up at leaving CNN and going to Harvard and founding a citizen media platform. And immediately, because of the global, people were being censored, people were under surveillance, people were going to jail because of what they posted. And because of my China background, I began to be drawn into questions about the role that US companies were playing back in the mid-thousands in helping to build China's censorship and surveillance regime. And with Yahoo handing over user data to the Chinese government and getting yelled at in Congress, and Google going into China for a while with a censored search engine, and Microsoft receiving a lot of criticism for a while about the blogging platform it had in China, and under what circumstances it should deal with Chinese government demands. So I guess I've been dealing with these issues, and then I ended up writing a book, and the book came out when everybody was really euphoric about the power of the internet. And it was 2012, the Arab Spring had just happened. It's like the Facebook revolution, the Twitter revolution, yay, they're liberating platforms. But I sort of warned that we have these sovereigns of cyberspace, and they're not necessarily accountable, and we need to think about new ways to make sure that human rights are protected, both in private as well as public spaces, and that also that governments were not getting the regulation right either, and is sometimes being very counterproductive. And I was worried about that. And then that led to this Ranking Digital Rights project, where people rank companies on their environmental performance, or are they good employers, and I thought we should do a ranking on who's doing a better job of committing to and respecting users' rights. And, so that's probably a longer answer than you imagined, but we're, one goes on journeys with this stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
I understand. And thank you for giving us that history. Curious, another question. Businesses who are not forthright about their data governance, why do you think they are not? Do you think it's just that they feel that if they reveal their algorithms, they will, lose their edge, or, that they found this perfect, algorithm that really, increases revenue, et cetera? Or do you think there's something more sinister going on?
I think there's a whole combination of things, and oftentimes it varies from company to company. In part, it's like, if a regulation isn't requiring them to, they don't bother, because especially if you're a smaller company, it's just limited time and resources and focus. And then you get big and you still haven't bothered, and then it gets harder and harder to do.
Right.
And so, you know, companies started reporting, you know, putting out what's known as transparency reports about government censorship and surveillance demands they were getting. You know, Google was the first in 2010, and then Microsoft was also pretty early, and that was in response to criticism and crisis. They were getting yelled at in Congress, and so they felt, you know, they had to avoid. They had a trust problem, and which they had to fix by being more transparent. And so oftentimes it's in response to, if we're not more transparent, people won't trust us, and that'll be bad for our business. So companies kind of see an incentive. I think the most forward-thinking companies, you know, are kind of thinking further in advance about kind of where the issues are, rather than just reacting to crises.
Yeah.
And so yeah. And then there are some companies that just become so big and people are so dependent on them, they, you know, and I would probably say that this describes the company that performed worse in our index for digital platforms. Like, well, why do we need to bother? Because everybody has to use us anyway. And, you know, which kind of speaks to the whole monopoly power thing that they're talking about in Congress.
Yeah. Interesting. So it kind of becomes an issue of whether or not it's in your business model, sort of from the business's mission, from the sort of the formation of the company in some ways, or as you grow, did it continue to be important to the powers that be in your organization to, you know, to establish trust and have transparency with your customers. Fascinating. I'm gonna go to the questions now because we have a few. So number one is from from Kathleen. She said, "It seems to me that the social media industry is quite concentrated with relatively few players. Do you think breaking up these firms through antitrust actions would improve the situation or make it yet more problematic?"
Yeah, there's a big argument about that. And, you know, Facebook would say, well, you know, if you break us up, then it's going to be even harder to control the bad stuff on the internet because those people don't have as sophisticated systems as we do. On the other hand, though, I am in the camp that more diversity of platforms is will serve us better in the long run. But I also think, you know, I have a good friend and former colleague, Ethan Zuckerman, who's now at University of Massachusetts Amherst, used to be at MIT, who talks about the need not just for lots of for-profit diversity, but we also need just public interest, you know, digital infrastructure, public interest technology, you know, that it's important that communities be able to create smaller platforms that, you know, let's say a library and a university in Louisville kind of want to create a platform that's really suited to what people locally, some problems that people locally want to deal with, that they can control the content moderation, set their own rules, and so on, and not have to depend on Facebook. You know, in an ideal world, there would be some public funding to enable people to create public interest platforms that don't have to monetize, and aren't being driven either by shareholders or by venture capital to just monetize everything. And so, you know, there's some people have described it, you know, we need things like public parks on the internet that are just spaces for communities, and that aren't shopping malls necessarily. But of course, you do need to police them, right? You need you need police in a public park, probably for similar reasons than that you need, you know, police in an online space. And so, how does the community kind of set the rules, and how do you design it in a way that's safe for you know, there are all these issues that you know, governance issues, that just because you want to create a smaller space that your community can control, you know, those issues don't go away, and aren't easy. But I think we would be better off if there's more choice. I think part of the problem
Mm.
with something like Facebook, they've come under tremendous criticism, much deserved, in Burma, now known as Myanmar, for having allowed disinformation that led to effectively to genocide on their platform. And part of it is, just the content moderation. How does a California-based company moderate content and set rules and enforce them for a very specific cultural context that they can't understand? And so these are huge problems. They're not easy to
Yeah.
solve, but I think more diversity of choice of platforms would be ultimately, we're not going to fix all the problems any more than you're going to fix, all social problems in any, city and anywhere,
Right.
unless you want to be a police state, which you don't. So it's always going to be constantly, we all have to work towards creating spaces and maintaining them in a way that works for us.
Right. Absolutely. Another question is, I think about the National Enquirer that's, that you really used to see. I don't know that I see it as much anymore, but you went through the grocery store, and yes, I had an aunt who would buy the National Enquirer and like really be like, no, like this really happened. But we like kind of understood, like, I don't know why you think that, Aunt Carol, but like
these aliens went and
most
got in the
people
brain
know.
of the
Yes. So I guess my question is, yes, there's plenty of misinformation that goes out on the internet. Can you speak a little bit to like, where does it become my responsibility as a user to be able to, or as a thinking sentient being, to discern for myself what information is true, and to actually think about, investigating, to actually look at the facts, even look at the data, which I know nobody has time for, but I'm saying, like, can you just talk a little bit to like, where does my personal responsibility and a company's, whether that be an internet platform or, a friend who's posting something on social media, talk about that intersection of my personal responsibility and a company's responsibility to put out information that is accurate?
Yeah, well, it's tough, especially when you have a social media platform, which is different than, say, the National Enquirer, in that, when you've got billions of users, and you're not exercising a ton of editorial control, although you're trying to enforce some rules, and doing it ultimately in a spotty way. What should your responsibility be? Now, if the law said you're responsible for everything on your platform, then we couldn't have social media platforms unless they were all very small. And even then there could be issues. But at the same time, yeah, companies do have a responsibility to consider how, again, the way their platform is designed, and how that affects the flow of this type of information. And so that's one of the things we talked about. Certainly, I think the fact checking helps. More content moderation helps, but it's never, unless you deal with the fundamental kind of structural problem of what's driving the spread and the targeting. You're just going to be, playing whack-a-mole and just trying to clean up a mess that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. From the individual side, certainly I think we all need to stop and think before we retweet, before we repost. If a friend shares something, where did this come from? Take a look, read past the headline. Is this actually from a news organization I've heard of or not? So I think part of it, Twitter now has a feature that I see sometimes, like if you try to retweet something without having actually read it, you get a prompt saying, do you want to read this? I don't know if it appears for everybody in all cases, but I've certainly seen it. And so that kind of thing, just creating a bit more friction, kind of creating design features that encourage people to pause and think about what they're sharing, and to bring in more context. So some of the fact checking and labeling, I think, has been useful. But I think we also found some issues where, I know with some of the social media companies, the fact checking and labeling of information in English was okay, but not in Spanish. And it turned out there in this past year, there's been a huge problem with Spanish disinformation that kind of fact checkers and kind of the people who monitor disinformation were not really catching. And so again, it's the scale, and just the nature and diversity of society. What do you do? And so again, teachers as parents to really to 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 encourage our kids to think about where things come from. But it's also important, don't just rely on a social media platform for your news and what's shared by your friends. Actually look at some news sites, think about, okay, who is this news organization hiring? And, who are these journalists? And get a sense of, if is this news organization reporting things about other countries from those countries, or is it reporting about China from Texas? And so to what extent is this information actually coming from sources who are there, and to what extent is it reporting second and third hand information? So
Right.
so you just need, I think, we um, as consumers of information need to be a lot more informed, but we also need to challenge the platforms to do better.
Mhm.
We should challenge our elected representatives to hold these companies accountable, particularly around just the amount of data that's collected about us and the way we can be targeted, the complete lack of information about why you see what you see on a platform, what's being recommended to you on YouTube, why, can you control that at all? Um, that needs to be rendered a lot more transparent. We need to have a lot more control over it. And, again, our elected representatives could help us with that.
Thank you. And thinking in terms of other countries, got a couple questions. And I'll ask two of them. Do you have thoughts on the current news ban on Facebook in Australia? Can you explain the issue and how it might
Oh,
impact sharing
man.
of information in the US and elsewhere? And then what impacts on digital rights and privacy have you observed or would you expect from China's recent launch of the digital RMB currency last October?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So yeah. So I'll just talk really generally about both, because we could do whole sessions on either of these. And digital currency, I do not consider myself to be a huge expert on. It's something I've been following and kind of noting that I need to spend a lot more time on. My organization doesn't follow digital currency at the moment. Um, but I mean, certainly, uh, who controls the way in which people are paid? The fact that the U.S. dollar is sort of the international, the dollar and the euro to a great extent are currencies that most people are using for global transactions, and that could change over time to digital currencies that are not kind of based in the old system, and what government might control those or not. Of course, that I know some people who feel that Bitcoin could be quite liberating because you wouldn't necessarily, it wouldn't be controlled by any government, and so there's some people who feel that new currencies could be quite liberating, and others who are concerned that it could be yet another layer of control. I think ultimately it's sort of like the internet, right? When the internet came out, initially, it was sort of the Wild West, and governments have found ways to harness it. So have a lot of other actors. And so digital currencies are sort of the new, yet another layer of contested space where there's going to be power struggles going forward. That's going to have a huge amount of impact on trade and commerce, and kind of who wins and who loses, and who gets funding for what. Again, it can have human rights implications as well. And I know we're running low on time, and the Australia Facebook issue, Facebook has caved. Apparently, Australia basically was going to require Facebook and Google and everybody to basically pay major news organizations for the content from news organizations whose snippets they were using. Google made a deal with the major news organizations in Australia. Facebook played hardball, blocked all news on Facebook in Australia, and eventually relented and is now negotiating a solution. Again, this whole situation is complicated. I think what it's telling us is a few things. One is that governments are concerned about digital platforms having too much power, and global digital platforms that are not from their country, right? So Australia is feeling these American platforms are coming in. They're siphoning revenue away from our domestic news media who have lost advertising revenue, and we need some of that money back. Also, the domestic news media there had more power to lobby in the Australian legislature than foreign platforms did. So we're able to kind of get what they wanted out of that law. Yet at the same time, the implications are, well, if you have every government kind of imposing random laws on what news these companies can share, then that has implications for the global free flow of information. That's also troubling. So we do also need to make sure that when governments are passing laws, they're considering not just, okay, my constituents getting the money they want, but what are the implications for freedom of expression domestically and globally when I pass this law? And companies, of course, I think need to take more responsibility for, are you just killing journalism, and is that good for society in the long term? And if so, do you need to find ways, think of ways to adjust your business model so that you don't kill journalism, one way or another, that actually these platforms in the long run, certainly civic space and kind of world we want to have, will be greatly weakened, and democracy will be weakened if we don't have independent journalism. And that's not in the platform's long-term interest. So they've got to find a way to support independent journalism. And because I don't think Facebook becoming a news organization is something I want to see, frankly. So I think that these companies need to think a little bit about what kind of, again, how do we build a sustainable global ecosystem that is not, that actually supports the kind of society we want to have and enables businesses to function. And maybe that means you don't earn every single dollar you could earn, but if you polluted the air and water and hired 10-year-olds, you could earn a lot more money too, and you don't for a reason. And so similarly, you have to think more holistically about this ecosystem that you're part of and how you support it responsibly for the long term.
Absolutely. And thank you for tackling such a such a difficult topic. And I think one of my big takeaways is, there really are no easy answers. There's a lot of intersections we have to think about, a lot of, governance versus individual rights that have to be thought about. But there's definitely more that companies can do to be transparent about their policies and practices around data privacy. And so with that, Rebecca, just want to say thank you so much for being with us. And I will turn it back over to, let's see, Lydia or Shayan. Okay.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, Rebecca, so much for that conversation and for the questions. Just as I was listening to your conversation, I just can't help by thinking about all of the questions we have and the fact that there's just no one size fits all answer to any of them, just by virtue of the fact that social media is so individualized by this whole targeting effect. So in some ways, we're all kind of learning together, as a society, government, companies, and users as well. So it's probably something that's going to be following us forever. But I love, Alicia's point about that user piece. There is an element, and maybe it is up to us to be much better informed as users what we want to have on social media. It certainly isn't easy because I always struggle with the fact that I like what I see. So I keep on clicking on the things because they keep on feeding it to me. So I struggle with the fact that thinking, if I click this, am I going to see the same thing again? Will I ever see something different? So it's a bit of a personal conundrum all the time. So it would be great to follow up on that type of conversation. So, but I really appreciate both of your expertise and asking the right questions. And I know we had a couple of questions and comments that we didn't get to. We will try to address them on our follow-up email after this program. Maybe Rebecca and Alicia might help us shed some light on some of those questions. So if anybody in our audience who's interested in knowing more about the Ranking Digital Rights Index, the one that just released, it's on their website, and Lydia has already shared it in our chat box. You could take a look at it. It goes into much more detail than obviously that Rebecca can go into now, but take a look at that and certainly let us know how, and we look forward to the next one. Seems like the number of companies might increase, hopefully there's some progress that you can do, look at how they are now than they were, a couple years ago, and hopefully you could see some changes there. And before we conclude, I just want to do a quick reminder for everybody that's here. We do have a program next Thursday. It's a member salon, which is kind of a member only meeting forum where we discuss current issues. And it's really an interactive discussion forum, but we do get experts or a guest presenter on the topic. And next Thursday at 5:30, we're going to have our speaker, Joseph Lasavio, who is with the World Economic Forum, to give us a kind of behind the scenes look of Davos 2021, some discussion on that. So I hope you will all bookmark our website, worldkentucky.org, which is also in the chat to everybody, and stay tuned with our weekly program. So again, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Alicia, for taking the time tonight and sharing with our audience this really important topic. And hopefully when we get back in person, we can get you back again, Rebecca, on sharing the next time the index comes out again. So thank you both. Take care and stay safe, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.